The cadets were already laughing when the human walked in. Not loudly, just that low, confident snicker predators use when they think they're safe at the top of the food chain. The air shimmered with amusement. One Threx flicked his claws together, another swished a scaled tail across the floor. All of them turned to watch the new arrival. Elias Wren, earthborn, unarmed, unimpressive. He didn't bare teeth, didn't posture. He just walked to his seat with the slow, steady composure of someone who didn't realize he was being mocked, or worse, of someone who did and didn't care. To the alien cadets, he looked fragile. No armor plates, no toxin glands, no visible weapons. Just skin. The infamous Deathworlder looked soft. "That's it?" whispered a chitin-skinned cadet behind him. "That's the predator species everyone's afraid of?" "Maybe the translator glitched," another muttered. "He doesn't even smell dangerous." Elias set down his datapad, folded his hands, and stared straight ahead. He didn't look insulted, didn't look amused. He looked bored. Then the door opened again, and the laughter died. The Raucon entered. Young but already built like a weapon, black and crimson fur, digitigrade legs, retractable claws that clicked once against the deck before folding back in. Even seated cadets leaned away instinctively. Raucons weren't just predators, they were apex predators. Their kind hunted things that fought back. His name flashed on the seating chart. Terran Raucon Dominion, Pred Class Cadet. He was meant to sit in the reinforced seat at the back, inside a restraint field padded with enough suppression foam to stop a berserker charge. It was protocol. Everyone had seen the briefing. But Terran didn't follow it. He stood in the center of the aisle for a moment, nose tilted slightly, nostrils flaring. Then he padded forward, each step slow and deliberate. His eyes narrowed, focusing on something ahead. And then he Saturday. Beside the human, every species in the room froze. One cadet whispered, "Looks like the human's the safest seat." "Or the easiest meal," another muttered. The Raucon said nothing. Neither did Elias. Commander Vial, standing at the front of the class, turned from the observation window. Half his face was metal, war-forged, not decorative. His eye implant adjusted focus with a soft whir. He studied the two cadets in silence, then walked to the front console, and smiled. He pressed his palm to the pad. The doors locked. A series of magnetic bolts thudded shut, followed by the low hum of an environmental seal. Then the lights dimmed to deep red. No one moved. No one joked. "Lesson 3, Vial said, his voice measured and cold. "Instinct containment." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. All communications dropped from the local network. The room's internal sensors came online. Sound dampeners kicked in to isolate the hall. It was a full psychological evaluation mode, the kind reserved for high-risk predator-prey simulations. But there was no simulation today. Just two cadets, side by side. The Raucon's ears flicked once. He didn't like confinement. His kind evolved on open terrain, vast plains where walls meant death. Trapped spaces triggered the oldest instincts. He inhaled once more. And flinched. Because there was no fear coming from the seat beside him. The rest of the room reeked of it: anxious sweat from the herbivores, irritated pheromones from the omnivores, tense warning scents from his own kind. But the human? Nothing. No fear, no aggression. Just stillness. Terran turned his head slowly. "You don't smell afraid." Elias didn't move. His voice, when it came, was calm. "You don't smell dangerous." Gasps rippled through the chamber. A Lurth cadet physically recoiled, the spines on his back twitching. Terran blinked, slowly. "What did you say?" Elias turned slightly, just enough to meet the Raucon's gaze. "I said you don't smell dangerous. You smell uncertain. And a little tired." Terran's claws flexed slightly, the pads of his fingers pressing into the table's edge. "You mock me?" "No," Elias replied. "I'm watching." Commander Vial made no move to interrupt. The rest of the room did exactly what Elias didn't. They postured. Some puffed spines, some hissed low warnings, others pulled limbs tight against themselves like shrinking might make them invisible. Every response was classic instinctual, because that was what the lesson was about, wasn't it? Behavioral cohesion under pressure. But Elias wasn't playing the game. He sat there, spine straight, hands flat, heart rate hovering at 61 BPM. The room's biometric overlay confirmed it. Everyone else showed stress markers climbing. Even the omnivore species that weren't supposed to react to predators were sweating lightly under fur or shell. Only Elias was calm. Terran rose from his seat slowly, stretching to full height. His shoulders rolled once, claws scraping gently against the metal desk. He took 2 steps, turned, and stood directly in front of the human. "You should move," he said, low and gravelly. "That's what prey does." Elias blinked once. "That's what predators expect." Terran's tail lashed once. The words weren't just odd, they were wrong. No cues, no posture. Elias wasn't giving him anything to read. The Raukon's instincts clawed at him for a response, something he could use, some way to classify this thing. But there was nothing. Just a man. Watching. Behind them, the other cadets leaned back further. One tapped an emergency code into his desk. No response. The room was sealed. Commander Vielle stood motionless. Because this was exactly the point. Elias hadn't just bypassed the hierarchy, he'd erased it. He didn't submit. He didn't challenge. He simply didn't react. And for a predator species like Terrans, that was unnatural, terrifying, in a way no tooth or claw ever could be. Because predators needed cues, they needed feedback, territory, reactions, power structures. But Elias didn't play by those rules. Elias was doing something worse. He was waiting. Terran could feel it now deep in his hindbrain. That ancient terrible realization that whatever sat in front of him wasn't prey, wasn't another predator either. It was something else. Something older. Something that survived its world by not moving when death walked by, and by killing only when it had to. Terran took a half step back. He didn't mean to. His claws retracted. Elias looked up at him again. "That's not anger," he said softly. "That's confusion." The Raukon's ears pinned flat. "I could kill you." "You could try," Elias replied. But there was no arrogance in the voice. Just a quiet, terrible sincerity. Then Elias leaned back, stretched once, and folded his arms behind his head. And the room got even quieter. The timer in the back corner kept counting down. 18 minutes remained. And no one knew what would happen next. 17 minutes left on the clock. Terran hadn't moved, neither had Elias. But the rest of the room had. Subtly, incrementally, cadets were shifting, some toward exits that would not open, some shrinking behind their desks, some breathing through gills or scent vents, as though clearing pheromones might reset the moment. It didn't. Because the moment wasn't chemical. It was behavioral. Terran's claws curled against the floor. His instincts demanded he reassert position, remind the others what he was. But every time he looked at the human, something stopped him. It wasn't Elias's face, no snarl, no sneer, no rage. It was his silence. That quiet, watchful stillness. The kind that didn't need a raised voice to dominate a room. It radiated not power, but patience, and that, somehow, was worse. Terran growled low, not as threat but frustration. He wasn't used to this. He knew how to climb over prey, how to outmatch rivals. But this was something with no footing. He stepped closer again, slowly, measured, not lunging, not charging, just close enough to test. "You really think you'd survive me?" he asked, voice a low growl only Elias could hear. Elias exhaled softly through his nose, not quite a sigh. His posture stayed relaxed, legs crossed loosely, his right hand tracing a slow circle on the desk's corner, not nervously, not idly. "Wrong question," Elias said. Terran tilted his head slightly. "Then what's the right one?" Elias looked up at him, calm. "Why would I have to?" The cadets around them stilled further, spines rigid, gills flared, crests flattened. One of the Phelan cadets whispered under his breath, "What does that mean?" Commander Vielle's voice came from the front, not loud, not forceful, just clear. "It means the human knows something you don't." Terran turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Then tell me." Vael walked slowly around the perimeter of the class, hands behind his back. Raukons are top-chain predators on your world. You're trained to measure everything by reaction. Flee, freeze, fight. Your instincts aren't habits. They're programming survival by response. He paused behind a Lurth cadet who was actively sweating through his chitin. But humans, they don't follow those rhythms. Vael's gaze returned to Elias. They don't wait for signals. They don't read cues like we do. They watch, and they decide. Elias didn't nod, didn't smile, but Terran could feel the truth of it. It rang behind the human stillness like a quiet chord. Terran's voice was cautious now. "You're not trying to win, are you?" Elias tilted his head. "Win what?" The Raukan blinked. "The game," he said. "The hierarchy. Dominance." The human leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift his gaze level with Terran's again. "There's no hierarchy," he said. "Not unless you believe in one." His voice wasn't challenging, it was gentle, almost curious. And that was the worst part. It wasn't personal. It wasn't even targeted. Elias wasn't fighting for dominance. He just didn't need it. The Predator cadets were shifting again, not forward, but inward. Terran could smell it now. Not fear, not submission. Confusion. That dangerous limbo where instincts don't work. He stepped back again, 2 full paces this time. His shoulders slumped slightly. His tail slowed. The spike of adrenaline in his bloodstream was receding. His breathing shifted unconsciously toward the human's tempo. And that's when it happened. The whole room began to mirror Elias. A low hum of tension dissipated, not through violence, but through absorption. Even the herbivores stopped twitching. The omnivores folded their hands. The Threx cadet who'd flicked his claws earlier now sat perfectly still. The human wasn't a threat. He was a center. Vael tapped his console, silently, marking the exact moment. Timestamp, 12:44 remaining. Subject, Elias Wren. Event, room-wide autonomic sync. Heart rates converging, tension markers falling. No voice raised, no movement made. Instinct containment achieved. He'd never seen it happen this way. Raukins sometimes de-escalated with rank display. Herbivores froze until predators got bored. But this wasn't reaction or suppression. This was override. He watched Elias lean back again and slowly blink. Not in dominance, not in indifference, but in perfect composure. Beside him, Terran finally sat back down. Not out of defeat, but because he wanted to. His claws retracted fully, his tail curled neatly around the base of his chair. He glanced sideways at Elias, then forward again. No one told him to. No pheromone made him. He just did. And no one laughed anymore. The timer ticked past 11 minutes. And still, no one spoke. Not because they'd been ordered to remain silent. That order had come and gone in other training scenarios, often ignored by cadets eager to test boundaries. No, this silence was something else. Something chosen. Something maintained. Because every breath in that room now felt like it needed permission. Elias hadn't moved since he leaned back in his seat. His eyes were half-lidded, one foot tapping faintly against the floor in a pattern no one could place, maybe a rhythm, maybe nothing. The datapad beside him remained untouched. He wasn't playing a role. He simply was. Terran shifted slightly, testing his own breathing. It had slowed by 3 full cycles per minute. He hadn't meant to sync with the human. He hadn't even known it was happening. But now that he noticed, he couldn't unsee it. Elias's calm wasn't just a personal state, it was infectious, viral. And that was deeply wrong. Not bad, not dangerous, just unclassifiable. Terran had been trained to detect threats. He could scent adrenal fluctuations, hear micropupil dilations, read tail twitch frequencies down to the millisecond. His entire body was built to process threat levels before they manifested. But Elias triggered none of those. He didn't suppress tension, he replaced it. And that replacement was the most unsettling thing Terran had ever encountered. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Terran asked quietly. He wasn't posturing now, he wasn't hunting, he was asking, genuinely. Elias turned his head not fast, not sharp, just fluid, and studied him, not stared. Studied. Because it would be unfair to you. The answer made Terran's ears flick involuntarily. Unfair? Yeah, Elias said, voice flat but not cold. You'd lose your temper. I'd stay calm. It wouldn't end well. The room stilled again, as if gravity itself paused. That statement wasn't a threat, it wasn't even assertive. It was true. Terran leaned forward slightly, scanning Elias's face again. Still no pupil dilation, no jaw flex, no elevated muscle tension. You think you could kill me? Elias didn't blink. No. Terran's mouth opened, confused. I think I wouldn't have to, Elias added. And then, something shifted. Not in Terran in the air around him. The quiet part of his brain, the part not built for words or logic, the part that remembered the shape of ancestral fear, pulled back. Because what it saw in Elias wasn't prey. It wasn't even predator. It was something older than the games of teeth and hierarchy. It was the look of a creature that didn't care about your size, your speed, or your claws. It only cared about outcome. And humans didn't bluff. Terran's tail dropped flat to the ground. His hands opened slowly, claws fully retracted now. He didn't even realize he was surrendering until he was already doing it. It wasn't submission like his species taught, no lowering of the head, no exposing the throat. It was deeper, instinctive. It was the kind of surrender a wild animal gives a storm. Not because the storm is evil, but because the storm doesn't care what you are. Across the room, Vial observed silently, his mechanical lens recording every data point. The biometric overlays were flattening heart rates, leveling, cortisol crashing, neural tension ebbing like tide after a quake. And he understood, now, why humans couldn't be modeled. They didn't dominate. They didn't adapt to your system. They rewrote it. The Phelan Cadet herbivore class had stopped shaking. His palms, once pressed tightly against his desk, now lay open. The Threx, whose crest had been raised this whole time, finally let it drop. The omnivores stopped checking each other's scent levels. And the silence deepened into something entirely new. It wasn't fear anymore. It was alignment. Not by force, but by inevitability. Vial made another notation in his console. Subject: Elias Wren. Instinct synchronization effect. Confirmed interspecies. Voluntary compliance induced. No voice modulation. No biochemical manipulation. He paused, then added, not dominance, not submission, reframing. Terran sat back once more, eyes wide, but no longer hostile. You're not prey, he said quietly. Elias nodded once. Neither are you, he replied. That's the point. The timer dropped under 10 minutes. But the lesson was already over. By the time the countdown reached 9 minutes, no one in the room was watching the clock. Because the clock no longer mattered. Something had happened, some shift in gravity, in instinct, in perception, and it was still happening, even now, even in silence. The cadets weren't just observing Elias anymore, they were orbiting him, mentally. Everything they thought they knew about threat, fear, response, none of it had prepared them for stillness as a force. Terran remained beside Elias, shoulders slack, eyes slightly downcast, not shamed, not afraid, but thinking. That was rare for a Raukan in fight posture. Rare and dangerous. They didn't think in conflict, they reacted, decisively, permanently. But now he was thinking. Terran leaned slightly to the side, just enough to ask, what were you taught on Earth? What makes you like this? Elias didn't look at him. His reply was neutral. Nothing taught me, everything tried to. What do you mean? Where I'm from, Elias said, things don't hunt you for status, or territory, or ritual. They hunt you because they're hungry, or bored, or just because they can. Terran said nothing. He knew of such places, fringe worlds, failed colonies, but not as birthplaces, not as home. And what did you do? The Raukan asked. Elias shrugged. We adapted. Terran stared at the human's hands. No claws, no blades, just soft digits, nails worn but clean. You have no natural weapons. Elias finally looked at him. We are the weapon. It wasn't a boast, There was no elevation in tone. It was as flat and certain as a weather report. Commander Vial, still watching from his corner, typed something rapidly into his personal log. Note: Subject Ren's calm is not learned, it is native. The room has not shifted to respect him, it has realigned itself around him. He looked across the cadets. The herbivores no longer tried to reduce their profile. The carnivores no longer felt challenged. The omnivores, the flexibles, were all leaning slightly forward now, as if drawn closer by an invisible hand. Vial understood. It wasn't fear. It was equilibrium. And it was rare enough that he didn't want to interrupt it. But then the air changed. A faint hiss, mechanical, unnoticed at first until the temperature dropped 1 degree. The scent of ozone spiked. The cadets stirred. Everyone turned to the front wall as it shifted just slightly, revealing the outline of a containment panel. Inside, a tranquilizer drone sat idle. Vial noticed it too late. One of the auto triggers had misfired, detecting prolonged predator engagement without resolution. It had armed the failsafe. Terran's head whipped toward the source, instincts reawakening like fire in dry grass. Elias moved first. Not fast, not violently. He simply stood up. Not a single alarm blared. Not a single threat display activated. And yet, the drone froze mid-cycle, its threat index wavering. Elias stood facing the containment panel, hands loose at his sides. His breath was steady. His heart rate still visible on the shared biometric HUD had not moved. Terran felt it behind him again, that wave of silent inevitability. Elias took a single step forward. The drone lowered itself slowly, powered down. The panel resealed. The room exhaled. Only then did Commander Vial speak. That wasn't supposed to happen. Elias turned halfway, glanced at the instructor. I know. Vial's mechanical eyelid flicked once. You didn't disable it, he said. No. You didn't threaten it. I didn't have to. Vial took 2 steps forward, placing his hand on the lectern as he spoke to the class. What you saw just now, what you felt was not reflex, not chance. It was calibration. Human instinct operates differently from yours. It doesn't spike. It doesn't posture. It absorbs. He looked at Terran. You tried to dominate him. He didn't resist. He didn't defer. He simply refused to participate. That's not a rejection of instinct. It's a weaponized version of it. Then he looked back at Elias. And when that failed, he did something your species cannot do. He forced your body to realign by holding his own steady. Terran, still seated, looked up slowly. Is that why you never flinched? He asked. Elias turned to him, expression unreadable. It's not about not flinching, he said. It's about choosing when. Vial clicked the override switch on his console. The magnetic locks disengaged, the timer hit 0. The doors opened. But no one stood. Because the lesson hadn't ended. It had settled. And the only one who rose, without hurry, without pride, was Elias. He walked out first, datapad under his arm, shoulders straight. Just before he disappeared through the doorway, he paused. Terran watched him carefully, expecting something. A word, a gesture. But all Elias did was glance over his shoulder and say, You weren't wrong. Terran blinked. You are dangerous, Elias said. Just not in here. And then he was gone. The door sealed behind Elias with a soft magnetic hiss. Still, the room remained motionless. Terran didn't stand. He couldn't. Not from injury, his muscles worked fine, but because his body hadn't decided what came next. He sat there, not confused, not afraid, but changed. Something quiet had come unseated in his mind, and it hadn't yet found a new place to anchor. The seat beside him, still warm from the human's presence, radiated an emptiness that was not absence, but weight. Across the room, cadets blinked slowly, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. There had been no battle, no violence, no flared nostrils or torn flesh or dominance displays. And yet the atmosphere felt like aftermath, like standing in a crater after something impossible had passed through. Commander Vale stepped to the center of the hall. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. What you experienced today was not confrontation, he said. It was recalibration. He looked slowly around the room, pausing at each species. You were taught that conflict is measured in responses, that instincts are the oldest truth, that muscle memory is king. His metallic foot thudded lightly against the deck. You were taught wrong. He turned toward the seat Elias had vacated. The screen beside it still glowed softly with biometrics: pulse, stable; breathing regulated; cortisol undetectable. Humans don't win by overpowering. They win by not reacting when expected. They survive not because they are strongest, but because they are unreadable until it's too late. One of the cadets, the Lurth, with the twitching backplates, raised a cautious hand. But how? How can a species evolve like that? Vile considered, before answering. Because their world required it. Earth wasn't just dangerous, it was patient. It didn't strike fast, it wore things down. Their apex predators didn't chase. They waited, camouflaged, stalked. He paused. And so did the humans. Terran's claws tapped once, slowly, against the edge of the desk. He said I was dangerous, but only not in here. What did he mean? Vielle looked at him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, he meant your instincts work somewhere, in combat, in open terrain, where movement decides outcomes. He tapped the side of his temple. But in here, where stillness is the battlefield? You lost before you stood up. Terran's tail curled slightly, not in shame and understanding. He had learned something no Raucon had ever taught him, not just about humans, about himself. He nodded once. I want to learn it. Vielle raised an eyebrow. You want to learn what he did? I want to understand how not reacting becomes a weapon. Vielle smiled faintly, something rare and thin. Then you already have. He walked slowly back to the control panel and powered down the biometric systems. The lights returned to normal, bright, cool, artificial. But the room stayed quiet. Finally, Vielle faced the class one last time. You've spent your entire training preparing for claws, for fangs, for aggression. He let the silence stretch. Prepare now for stillness, for restraint, for that calm, calculating quiet. He gestured toward the exit. Class dismissed. The cadets filed out in slow, uncertain motion. No conversation started, no jokes returned. Even the Threx kept his claws sheathed. Terran was the last to leave. He stopped at the doorframe and glanced back at the empty human seat. Then, looked up at Vielle. I think I get it now. Vielle nodded. Say it. Terran's voice was quiet. He didn't defy instinct. He controlled it. Later that evening, Terran found Elias outside on the observation deck, seated alone beneath a panoramic field of stars. No datapad, no music. Just the kind of quiet that could only come from someone who didn't need anything else. The Raucan approached slowly. No posturing, no test. He sat beside Elias, mirroring the same posture. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Terran said, You could have made me attack you. Elias didn't turn his head. I know. You could have humiliated me. I wasn't interested. Terran flexed his claws, just once, not threatening, just habit. Then why didn't you fight? Elias tilted his head to the stars. Because you didn't want to. Terran blinked. I didn't know that. Elias turned to him finally. Calm, clear. I did. Terran exhaled slowly. Not a sigh. Not defeat. A release. He looked ahead again, silent for a while, before asking, So what would have happened if I had attacked? Elias's expression didn't change. He didn't tense, didn't warn. He just said, quietly, You'd be explaining that to medical. Terran didn't ask how. He believed it. Not because of threat. Because of truth. And that made all the difference. He nodded slowly. You should be a commander. I shouldn't, Elias replied. You'd all follow me. Terran turned toward him, confused. Isn't that the point? Elias smiled faintly. It is. It is. And that was the scariest answer yet. The next week, Vielle received a notice from Central Command. It was brief. Subject Wren, reassigned independent observation, requested by Joint Species Tactical Division. No explanation. No override. Just a new file attached, tagged with a phrase pulled from an old Earth military code. silent,